What's up, everybody? My name is Kromda, and today we're bringing you another episode from the UEM. Now, today we're going to talk about dungeons. Last week we talked about the intro to World of Warcraft, what World of Warcraft is, some little things about dungeons, as well as guilds and raids and those sort of stuff, but we're going to go a little more in depth with what a dungeon is. Now, I have here some footage from a dungeon that I ran earlier myself. I'm tanking this dungeon, and we'll talk about certain little things that we need to really think about when we're approaching a dungeon. The first thing we need to think about is, what is a dungeon? Well, a dungeon is a place where you can go to do harder content with a group of people, just like we said before, and we even said about the guilds being a group of people. But it's a content area for us to get gear. Now, we do this to 1 level. 2, we can go ahead and get the gear. 3, we can do it for fun. 4, we can trash it and solo it. Or 5, we can do mythic pluses. And it's an endless source of content. The whole point behind the dungeon is so that way Blizzard has something for us to do constantly. Now, with next week, or I should say, not next week, but tomorrow being the reset, since this is going to air at 7 p.m. or 7 a.m. Monday, like I always will be, with tomorrow being the reset, I highly anticipate that the Mythic Pluses are going to be coming out. But we're going to talk about that a little bit later. We need to first now figure out the dynamics of how this is going to work. And the best way to put it is there are 5 people in a dungeon. As you can see down in the corner of the screen, there's myself, the red box, there's Cell, the white box, and then there are 3 different boxes. There's the purple, the yellow, and the, well, teal. And those are a warlock, rogue, and monk. Every dungeon needs 5 people. 1 tank, 1 healer, and 3 DPS, equaling 5. The roles are quite simple. The tank is going to go in, he's going to piss everything off, and he's going to hold it for you. And if you've got a great tank, that's easy to do. The healer's job is to heal everybody and keep everybody alive, mainly the tank, to ensure that the dungeon can continue forward without there being too much in the way of trouble. The DPS's job is to do as much damage as possible so they can get through the dungeon faster. Now, every single dungeon is different. In Battle for Azeroth right now, we've got 10 dungeons. I'm not going to name them all off because I don't have the list in front of me. But we've got 10 different dungeons here, and there are lots of bosses in each of them. Generally, there's about 3 bosses per dungeon. There are sometimes more, and there have been times where there's less. But generally, there's about 3. This dungeon in particular has 5 bosses. Now, that first boss you saw us kill, the big fat pig, was really simple, straightforward. We just go ahead, tank it, and take care of it. This boss here is a little more tricky, and so you've got to really understand the mechanics behind each of the bosses, but don't let that intimidate you. Because a lot of the time, all you gotta do is just kind of look at your surroundings, and you'll get an idea of what you need to do. I mean, in this sort of case, I need to run this guy through the fire in order for him to lose his stacking damage buff. And that's great. That's an easy, straightforward boss. Now, something that Sal and I were talking about, actually, during this dungeon is, quite simply put, that you've got to follow the mechanics. You've got to follow these mechanics. You've got to interrupt when you're supposed to. You've got to do these things because back in vanilla WoW, there was no heroics. There was nothing of that matter. It was just the dungeons, and they were hard. They were really hard. But it's during Burning Crusade, the second expansion of the first expansion, because Burning Crusade was first. It's it was during Burning Crusade that you really had to do CCing and you had to do different things like that. I can say for a fact when I did King's Rest on Mythic just yesterday, that was an absolute nightmare because it was really hard to figure out where did I need to go and what did I need to interrupt. And it just turned out that I needed to basically interrupt everything. But otherwise, these are just some simple little things. But another thing we started to talk about is what our roles are as DPS healers and tanks. And it's become stigma that the healer is supposed to be able to fix every mistake. But in actual reality, as of recent, we have really noticed a bigger increase of difficulty because the healers aren't able to actually keep up with the healing that is needed to be done. Because a lot of people will go ahead and they'll let off, a spell go off and not interrupt it when they're supposed to. Or they'll stand in fire. And these things will really wear down your healer and their mana bar. Another thing that we've got to keep in mind is that mana bar. It as a tank, for those of you who are looking to tank, and if you are, my stream's a great place to go. I'm almost always tanking there. But otherwise, as a tank, you've really got to keep an eye on your healer. Your job is to protect them because they're going to keep you up. While the DPS's job is to interrupt. They're in the prime place to interrupt. Because they don't need to be watching for a whole ton of things, and it just makes life a lot easier. But a lot of the time, people have really just kind of defaulted to not interrupting or allowing the tank to interrupt, and that becomes a real issue later on. But we're going to go ahead, we're going to kind of shift ourselves from that subject, because that's going to be for another point in time. But we're going to now talk about the different difficulties. Every single dungeon has 3 difficulties, 4 if you want to count Mythic pluses. There's Normal, Heroic, Mythic, and then the Mythic Plus. Now, you start with Normal, and you work your way up. And the whole goal is to get to Mythic and Mythic Pluses, and these are great ways to get yourself geared for, say, raiding, or even PvP. Last I've understood, PvP is scaled by your item level, but I'm not 100% sure how it works now. I need to figure that out. But dungeons are a fantastic way of getting geared and being able to get some, things to either change your transmogs or even just, be a little more powerful. I was commenting to Cell earlier during this dungeon that, it's rather interesting because while we had gone here the first time I'd hit 120, everything was whooping me, and here I am now, and I'm just kind of like, oh, well, it's pretty straightforward, and there's not a lot of damage coming in. It's really easy to keep on top of it. So, as you gear up, you do get a lot easier, and it does become a bit more of a numbers game of, okay, well, how much further can I go without this, or what can I do with that? So on and so forth. But the gearing route is the end game content. Once you hit 120, if you want to raid, you need a gear. If you want a PvP, you need a gear. And that's just how the game is designed. That's an MMORPG for you. You've got to always be doing something of that nature. You can't just go ahead and say, hey, you know what? I just hit one. Well, actually, no. You can say, I just hit 120, and I don't want to do anything else on this character. I'm going to go level another character, or I'm going to stop playing the game. You can say that. But more likely often, you're going to say, no, I want to keep playing, and I want to try out this new raid. Which, by the way, with us talking about this, that new raid comes out tomorrow. I'm super excited for that, actually. I've been waiting the whole time for that. But, back to the topic at hand, we've got to make sure that we set up our groups to be able to do these dungeons. Now, you can queue for them in the little LFD system. Now, the way you do that is, as you can see in the bottom right corner of my screen, you're going to see there's my action bar with my book, my arrow, my shield, my exclamation mark, my guild. And then there's an I. That is the LFD system. Now, you cannot queue for a mythic. You've got to sign up to a group that's going to do mythic, and they have to accept you. It's not randomly done. This is something Blizzard has set up so that way you don't, have an easy way of getting in. And the reason why is because it is a harder content. It is definitely harder. We in fact went into Mythic's Temple of Storms, Shrine of Storms, something like that. It's in this it's in this expansion. We went in there and we had a really tricky time because we had people who weren't ready for it, and we just kind of called it quits after the second boss. There wasn't a whole lot I could do, and so we had to call it. Now, like I was saying at the end of last video, the thing we impressed upon you is find a guild. This is a big deal because guilds are going to make it easy for you to access that content, because you can easily just ask one of your guild members, hey, do you want to go do a mythic or a mythic plus? And chances are they're either going to say yes or no. It's 50-50. Sometimes maybe. Those guys, they can forget themselves. Anyways, this allows you to get in, this allows you to get geared, and as you gear, you make dungeons easier. But you need to remember the whole, hey, am I going to tank, am I going to heal, or am I going to DPS? So, what we want you to do now, because we're going to give you a little bit of homework if you've made it this far in the video, and we've purposely tried our best to make it so this video isn't so bad. But what we want you to do now is we want you to sit there, and if you're a new player, we want you to ask yourself, what kind of role do I want to be playing? Do I want to be tanking, where I hold the boss like I'm seeing right now? Do I want to be doing that? Do I want to be healing like I see Cell epically doing behind the tank with his pendant bolts and just shooting the tank and healing them up? Or do I want to be doing as much damage as possible like these three guys who are doing very well about their damage and focusing the boss? You can't progress without those roles filled. They are big, they are crucial, and it is necessary. You try your best to do it alone, and you can do some alone, but to gear up and be ready for content that is harder than what you are normally used to or what you've experienced as you were leveling, you need to have a group. I highly suggest finding a group of people that you actually enjoy playing with that are on your server and doing this with them. It's a lot of fun. I take Cell into almost every single one of my dungeons. I take my off-tank into my raids, and she can tank or, DPS for me. I've got a couple DPS that I like to take into my dungeons with me, or raids, and it's a lot of fun. This is the endgame content, it's dungeons. Now, of course, like we said at the beginning, you can use the dungeons to level, but as of recent, that has not been the best method. The best method has been to quest. But otherwise, this is what really is going to be happening for the game. Now, with the expansion, with the new releases of Mythic Pluses, it is going to be a lot more content, and you can get fantastic gear that rivals raid gear. And that's going to be great for you guys. But otherwise, that's just a simple little overview of a dungeon. Now, as always, we'd like to thank you very much for watching the video. If you have made it this long, we thank you so much. We'd be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification button. I don't want to be that guy. It's the only time I'm probably going to do it. But otherwise, thank you so much for watching. Be sure to drop by our Twitch page at twitch.tv/Kromda. Or you can join our Discord and ask us questions anytime, or even just group up with us, or even join our guild on Weimrest Accord. We're Einheit. We will have a spelling for it. But otherwise, we'd like to thank you so much for your time. We hope you have a fantastic weekend or week, and we hope that you can get into some dungeons and get some really epic loot. But as always, thank you so much. Have a great night.